Günaydın, iyi günler diliyoruz. Uluslararası Üstâd-ı Cihân Tanbûrî Cemil Bey Çevrimiçi Sempozyumuna hoş geldiniz. Değerli Üstad'ın doğumunun 150. yılı için düzenlediğimiz bu sempozyumun inşallah çok başarılı geçmesini temenni ediyoruz. Ve hepinize katılımlarınızdan dolayı şükranlarımızı arz ediyoruz. Ben kısacık bir açılış konuşması hazırladım. Haddim olmayarak Sempozyum Düzenleme Kurulu Başkanı olarak görev yapmaya gayret ettim. Büyük bir şeref oldu benim için bu. Ve o dönemdeki ve bu süreçteki tecrübelerimizi, hedeflerimizi ve bundan sonrasında inşallah neler beklediğimizi bu sempozyumun ardından sizlerle kısacık paylaşacağım. Ondan sonra sözü üstadın kendisine yine kısa bir süre bıraktıktan sonra çok kıymetli 3 konuşmacımızla ortaya çıkmış olacak olan Ruhi Ayangil hocamızın başkanlığındaki açılış oturumumuzda sizi baş başa bırakacağız. Neden böyle bir sempozyum yapmak üzere yola çıktık? Hep birlikte hazırladığımız doğrudan sempozyum tanıtım yazısından yola çıkacağım. Üstâd-ı Cihân Tanburi Cemil Bey, gerek çalgı icralarındaki sıra dışı ustalık, gerek makamları algılayış ve yansıtma biçimindeki zenginlik, gerekse de Anadolu'nun çok kültürlü müzik birikimini kucaklayan kişiliği sebebiyle Türk müzik kültürünün hafızası olarak anılmayı hak eden bir sanatkar. Bu yüzden çok kıymetli Türk Müziği Akademik Çevresi yani TUMAÇ olarak kendisinin doğumunun 150. yılıyla örtüşen 2021 yılını kültürel açıdan Cemil Bey'in ülkemiz ve dünya adına ortak bir sanat hafızası olmasının öneminin altını çizecek bir dizi etkinlikle anlamlandırmayı hedefledik. Ve bu sempozyum bu etkinliklerin ilki. Dear guests, I'd like to say welcome on behalf of the organizing committee of the Üstâd-ı Cihân Tanburi Cemil Bey Symposium. Tanburi Cemil Bey deserves to be identified as the memory of Turkish music culture due to his mastership and talent in the performance of various instruments, to his unusual skills in the perception of makam-based music and the reflection of this skill in the area of performance, and finally to his intercultural view in approaching the music in Anatolia, arising through its multicultural past. Because of this, we, TUMAÇ, the Turkish Music Academic Circle, had aimed to celebrate 2021, the 150th anniversary of Tanburi Cemil Bey's birth, with a series of activities to underline the importance of Cemil Bey as a historical character that has carried the intercultural music history of Anatolia to today's world. Sempozyumun hedefleri neydi? Tanburi Cemil Bey'in temsil ettiği sanat ve kültür alanının icra, teori, tarih, çalgılar ve kültürel etkileşim gibi bileşenleri kapsamında akademik ve sanatsal çalışma üretilebilecek akademisyenleri, kültür ve sanat insanlarını ortak bir platformda buluşturabilmek. Ve dolayısıyla 7-9 Mayıs 2021 tarihleri arasında bu sempozyumun düzenlenmesine bundan dolayı karar verdik ve bu noktada geçen yazdan beri çalışmalarımıza devam ediyoruz. Takribi bir senedir bu sempozyumun hazırlıkları devam ediyor. Ve hani bu sempozyumu şu an oluşturuyor olmak bizi bir anlamda bir o kadar da mutlu ediyor ve gururlandırıyor. O yüzden tüm emeği geçenlere öncelikli olarak teşekkür ediyorum. Ve ne yaptık? Cemil Bey ile bu konu başlıkları altında doğrudan veya dolaylı olarak ilgi kuran yaklaşımlarla alakalı bildiri önerilerini topladık. Ve çok ciddi bir başvuru sayısıyla hem kapsamı olarak hem nicelik olarak hem de nitelik olarak karşılaştığımızı yine çok sevinerek söylüyorum. Ülkemiz akademisi ve sanat dünyası adına da çok sevindirici bir durumla karşılaştığımızı bu anlamda tekrar belirtmek istiyorum. As the first step of these activities, TUMAÇ had decided to organize the Üstâd-ı Cihân Tanburi Cemil Bey International Online Symposium in between 7th and 9th of May 2021 to bring together academicians and musicians worldwide in order to present their works in the areas symbolizing the musical life of Cemil Bey, like performance, theory, music history, instruments and cultural interaction. Bu etkinlik kimler tarafından organize edildi? Tabii ki öncelikli olarak Türk Müziği Akademik Çevresi. Çok önemli destekçileri vardı. Ve dikkat ederseniz bütün bu düzenleyen kurumlar hepsi sivil toplum girişimleridir. Hani TUMAÇ daha çok Türk Müziği Akademisi çevresinden oluşan bir yapılanma. Onun dışındaki dernekler ise hepsi akademi ve toplumu bir araya getirmeye çalışan çok önemli sivil toplum örgütleri. Anadolu Müzik Kültürleri Derneği, Mim Sanat Derneği ve Tanburi Cemil Bey Derneği tabii ki. This organization, this symposium was organized by mainly TUMAÇ, Turkish Music Academic Circle, and some non-governmental organizations. Association for Anatolian Musics, Mim Sanat Association, and Tanburi Cemil Bey Association as well. Ve sempozyumun yapısı neleri içeriyor? Çalgı bilimi, müzik kuramı, müzik tarihi, icracılık ve ilkeleri, modernite ve kültürel etkileşim başlıkları altında 52 bildiri, 67 uluslararası katılımcı, bunların içinde Türkiye'den pek çok katılımcı ama yurt dışından çok çeşitli ülkelerden çok önemli uzmanlar da var. 16 oturum, tabii ki Türkiye'nin de çok önemli uzmanlarının bu sempozyum içinde sunumlarının olduğunu tekrar hatırlatmam gerekiyor. Hani hem genç akademisyenlerden hem de konularında uzmanlaşmış çok tecrübeli akademisyenlere kadar geniş bir Türk Müziği Akademisi'nin burada temsil edildiğini yine sevinerek görüyorum. 16 oturum, 3 adet çok katılımlı konser ve bir sergi bu sempozyumun yapısını oluşturuyor. This symposium was organized under 5 main topics, namely as performance, theory, music history, instruments and cultural interaction. There will be 52 speeches by 67 international participants, and in these talks will be made in 16 different sessions. There will be 3 multi-participant concerts and 1 very nice exhibition. Sempozyumun çıktıları ne olacak? Somut çıktıları ne olacak elimizdeki kalan? Evet, değerli katılımcılar, kusura bakmayınız, ufak bir teknik sorunla karşılaştık. Umarım hani bundan sonrasında daha az yaşayacağız bu teknik sorunları. Tekrar kusura bakmayın. Evet. Şu an yayınında başladığını görüyorum. O yüzden devam edelim. Tekrar hoş geldiniz dileklerimi yine arz etmek istiyorum ve kaldığım yerden devam ediyorum. Biraz da zamanı da verimli kullanmak adına. Bu sempozyumun çıktıları neydi ya da nasıl çıktılar elde etmeyi bekliyorduk ve bunları nasıl şekillendireceğiz? Onunla ilgili en son konuşmaktaydım. Tekrarlayayım onları müsaade ederseniz. Bir kere kamuoyunda Tanburi Cemil Bey'in temsil ettiği ortak kültürel kimliğe dair bir farkındalık oluşturmak. En önemli amacımız buydu. YouTube yayınları ve internet sayfamız aracılığıyla bu konuyla ilgili kalıcı ve ulaşılabilir bir medya kaynağı oluşturmak ve Sempozyum özet kitabı ve bildiri kitapçığının yayınlanması. YouTube yayınlarımız kısa bir süre içinde internetten de ulaşılır hale gelecek. Lakin TUMAC'ın özellikle internet sayfasını zaten ziyaret ederseniz sempozyumla alakalı çok detaylı bir dokümantasyon olduğunu, bilgilendirme olduğunu göreceksiniz. Orada sempozyumumuzun çok detaylı yine özet kitabına da ulaşabilmeniz mümkün. Bunun yanında bildiri kitapçığının yayınlanmasıyla ilgili de çalışmalarımız devam edecek ve umarım sonbahar itibariyle en geç bildiri kitapçığımızı da bu 52 çok değerli konuşmanın metinlerinin yer aldığı ve İngilizce olarak da genişletilmiş özetlerle süslü bu kitapçığı sizlere sunma imkanı bulacağız. Bu yönde işin o altyapısı boyutunda, basılı olarak size bunu arz etmek boyutunda TUMAC, Tanbûrî Cemil Bey Derneği, Mim Sanat ve Anadolu Müzik Kültürleri Derneği yine eş zamanlı bir çalışmayı yürütüyor. What was the expected outputs of the symposium? To establish a public awareness about the common cultural identity represented by Cemil Bey, to create a reachable media source about this aspect through the YouTube broadcasts and our webpage, of course. And the final aim, and maybe the most important one, the publishment of the Sempozyum Book of Abstracts, and the future plan will be the publishment of the Great Book of Proceedings. I think that it will create an other value for the academic and art world of Turkey and the world. Ve sempozyumun etkisi ne olacak, ne olmalı, neyi hayal ediyorduk? Tabii ki bu bizim hayalimiz. Lakin bunun gerçekleşeceğine dair de sempozyumun o oluşum sürecinde çok fazla olumlu fikir edindiğimizi de söylememiz gerekiyor. Öncelikle bu sempozyumu düzenleyen işte bu oturumdaki kıymetli hocalarımızdan başlayan ve bu oturumun, bu sempozyumun altyapısında yer alan bütün kıymetli hocalarımız, arkadaşlarımızın o büyük emekleri, birikimleri, umutları, çalışma ve üretme azimleri bizi bu noktada çok olumlu görüşlere sevk ediyor. Bunu rahatlıkla söyleyebilirim. Nedir, ne olmalıdır bu sempozyumun, Tanburi Cemil Bey'in etkisi? Türkiye'de müzik performansı ve bestecilik eğitiminin benim değerli okulum, orada görev yapmaktan da gurur duyduğum Ankara Devlet Konservatuarı nezdinde başlamasının 85. yılı dün itibarıyla. Bu güzel gün de denk geldi. Değerli konservatuvarımızı hem bu noktada sempozyuma samimi katkılarından dolayı hocalarımızı, öğrencilerimizi hem de bu o kurucu fikirle ilgili o geleneğe dair katkılarından dolayı o yapının nezdinde de yine tebriklerimi, teşekkürlerimi arz ediyorum. Bu 85. yılın sonundaki hedefimiz ne olmalıydı? Ve Cemil Bey Sempozyumu'nun buradaki katkısı ne olmalı? Müzik sanatını toplumun entelektüel üretimini ve felsefi zenginliğini güçlü bir biçimde destekleyebilmesi adına akademi ve sivil toplum birlikleri aracılığıyla daha etkin toplumun düşünce hayatının en önemli noktalarına getirebilmek, oralara yerleştirebilmek, öyle bir noktaya oturtabilmek. Dolayısıyla Cemil Bey'in o manevi kişiliğinin buna vesile olabileceğini düşünüyoruz. Ve bu anlamda sanatın daha fazla konuşulduğu, sanat üzerine daha fazla düşünce üretildiği, sanat ürünlerinin toplumun o düşünce dünyasını daha fazla zenginleştirdiği ve o kültürel zenginliğimiz üzerinde çok güçlü bir gelecek telakkisi, tahayyülü ortaya çıkarabileceğimiz bir gelecek. Ve bu anlamda sempozyumun böylesi bir katkısı, etkisi olmasını gönülden diliyoruz. Bunun izlerini görüyoruz. Dedim ya, umarım öyle olacaktır. Umarım daha güzel günleri bu manada müzikle beraber toplumumuz adına ve dünya adına tecrübe edeceğiz. What is the impact of the symposium? What is the expected impact of the symposium? At the 85th anniversary of the starting of the education in performing arts and composition in Turkey by my dear school, Hacettepe University, Ankara State Conservatory, we should locate the art of music to a more efficient place for supporting the intellectual production and strengthening the philosophical richness of the public with the cooperation of academy and non-governmental organizations. That is what we aim to do as the result of this symposium and as the possible results of our future works about this aspect. Ve bu yönüyle tüm katılımcılara başarılı, umut dolu, hayal dolu bir sempozyum dilerim. I wish a fruitful symposium for all the participants. Ve şimdi sözü Tanburi Cemil Bey'e bırakalım. It is Cemil Bey's turn to speak now. Ve küçücük bir anekdotu onun. O hayatına dair yaklaşımı özetlediği. Vasil, kemençeci Vasil hocası, hatime-i hayatına kadar minnet ve sanat borcu hissiyle yanından ayırmadığı arkadaşı ve üstadı Lavtacı Andon ve Hristo. Zavallı Hristo, Vasil'den sonra sefaletten intihar etmişti. İle beraber çaldıkları köçekçelere, koşma ve destanlara, tavşanlara adeta gönül vermişti. Cemil really felt in love with the dance tunes, köçekçes, koşmaz, and destans, tavşans. They used to play with Vasilaki, Andon, and poor Hristo. Unfortunately, his life ended in poor conditions after Vasilaki. And we'd like to create the Cemil's dream world in reality in the near future in Turkey and the world. Umarım Cemil'in hayal dünyasını önce ülkemizde sonra da dünyada tekrar var edebiliriz. Güzel bir insanlık hayali olarak görüyorum bunu ama bu hayalin gerçekleşeceğine de tüm kalbimle inanıyorum. Bu arada Tanburi Cemil Bey Külliyatı'nı bizlere yayınlama izni verdiklerinden dolayı da Kalan Müzik'e sonsuz teşekkürlerimi arz ediyorum. Thanks to Kalan Müzik for their permission to us for broadcasting the works of Tanburi Cemil Bey. Thank you very much. Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ve Tanburi Cemil Bey küçücük bir belgesel klibimizle sizlere merhaba diyecek şimdi de. Now, Tanburi Cemil Bey will say welcome to you by our short video clip.
Saygıdeğer katılımcılar ve konuklar, 20. yüzyılın başındaki ses kayıt teknolojisinden yararlanarak Türk makam müziği seslerini ve seslendirdiği repertuarı taş plaklara kaydetmek suretiyle emsalsiz bir kültür ve ses hazinesi halinde bizlere armağan eden Cihan Üstadı, Tanbur Virtüözü ve bestekar Tanburi Cemil Bey'i 150. doğum yıl dönümünde anmak üzere bu çevrim içi sempozyum çerçevesinde toplanmış bulunuyoruz. Bu vesileyle siz değerli akademisyenleri ve tüm katılımcıları saygıyla selamlıyorum. Bu arada bu vesileyle isimlerini zikretmenin, ölümsüz isimlerini zikretmenin tarihi bir görev olduğunu bildiğimiz, gerek Tanburi Cemil Bey ile yürüttükleri sanat arkadaşlığı, gerekse onun musiki mirasını günümüze gelmesinde çok büyük katkıları olan bazı üstadlarımızı da rahmet ve minnetle, sağ olanlarını da sağlık dileklerimizle anmak bir borçtur. Bu manada tambur virtüözü bestekar ve Cemil Bey'in güzide talebesi Refik Fersan, Fahire Fersan, Musa Süreyya Bey, Hanende Hüsamettin Bey, Rauf Yekta Bey, Laika Kara Bey, merhum tambur virtüözümüz Necdet Yaşar, merhum kemençe virtüözümüz İhsan Özgen ve Allah uzun ömürler versin Kutbünai Niyazi Sayın Üstadımızı hürmetle, rahmetle ve sağlık dileklerimizle anıyoruz. Esteemed participants and guests, we have gathered within the framework of this online symposium to commemorate the world master tambur player and composer Tanburi Cemil Bey, who gave us a unique cultural and sound treasure by using the sound recording technology of the early 20th century and recording Turkish makam music and its repertoire on stone records. On this occasion, I greet you valuable academicians and all participants with respect. It is a historical duty to mention their deathless names of some big masters who contributed invaluable things to makam music universe, such as composer and tambur virtuoso Refik Fersan, Fahire Fersan, composer Musa Süreyya Bey, musicologist Rauf Yekta Bey and Laika Kara Bey, and the wonderful tambur performer Necdet Yaşar and kemençe performer İhsan Özgen, and we wish him has a good and healthy life, the master of ney Niyazi Sayın. Bu uluslararası sempozyumun bu ilk oturumunda alanlarında makam evrenine değerli katkıları olan 3 araştırmacıyla birlikte olmanın gurur ve mutluluğu içindeyiz. In the first session of this international symposium, we will be together with 3 valuable researchers of the makam universe. Şimdi sunumunu yapmak üzere, bu uluslararası sempozyumun ilk sunumunu yapmak üzere Azerbaycan Milli Bilimler Akademisi üyesi Profesör Doktor Suraya Agayeva'yı On the Futures of the Description of Musical Instruments in the Treatise ul-Qulub, ul-Qulub eserinde sazların tasvir özellikleri üzerine başlıklı konuşmasını yapmak üzere ilk sözü Bakü'den bağlanan değerli araştırmacı akademisyen Profesör Doktor Suraya Agayeva'ya vermek istiyorum. Saygıdeğer Agayeva, söz sizin. Mikrofonunuzu ve kameranızı lütfen açmak suretiyle oturuma katılabilir ve sunumunuzu yapabilirsiniz. Hoş geldiniz Sayın Agayeva. Buyurun efendim, söz sizin.
Teşekkür ederim. Ben de tüm katılımcıları bu değerli sempozyuma hoş gelmişsiniz diyorum ve selamlıyorum. I greeting all participants of this wonderful symposium. Now I will try to my presentation, yes, and now I will try bir saniye bunu yapayım. Share screen olacak. Bir de böyle. Gözüküyor mu ekranda benim presentation?
Şu anda gözükmüyor ama teknik ekibe soralım. Sayın Profesör'ün host yetkisi mi olacak? Nasıl olacak presentation?
Gözüküyor mu başlık filan, presentation, PowerPoint gözüküyor mu?
Bu ekrana yansıyan bir şey yok ama teknik ekipten sormak lazım. Bir dakika, onları cevabını bekliyoruz efendim.
Ben share screen yaptım ama bir şeyler gözükmüyor sanki. Gelmedi mi hiçbir şey?
Henüz gelmedi efendim.
Ne problem var mı? Ya ama ben share screen yaptım.
Bir kez daha başlatmanızı rica ediyorlar.
Şimdi gözüküyor mu bir şey? Benim
Hayır.
metnim gözüküyor mu? Metin gözüküyor mu?
Şu anda gözükmüyor efendim.
Ama ben share screen yaptım.
Metninizi masa üstünde açtınız mı Sayın Agayaba?
Bu nedir? Burada başka bir şey çıkıyor.
Metniniz masa üzerinde açık olursa paylaşılması daha kolay oluyor anladığım kadarıyla.
Ben açtım ama sizin ekranda nedense gözükmüyor. Mesela ben yeniden yapayım.
Şimdi galiba geliyor.
Bir saniye bakayım hangisidir.
Evet, şu anda açarsanız gelecek efendim.
Ama bende gelmedi. Bir saniye.
Şu ekranın tam ortasında bir Word belgesi var. Behçet musiki aletleri diye. O mu acaba?
Nasıl? Evet
Team,
ama ben bulamıyorum. Bende yok o.
Team Viewer,
Nereyse kayboldu. O
Team
benim
Viewer'ın yanında bir Word belgesi var efendim. O mu acaba?
efendim.
Team Viewer'ın yanında Behçet 7 musiki alatı diye bir tam
Evet,
onun
evet ama
sol altında.
evet odur ama benim ekranımda gözükmüyor ki ben onu şey yapayım.
Evet.
Ee, Bir saniye ben şimdi bunu biraz çekim bir başka yere. Evet. İsterseniz siz Jürgen'e söz verin o zaman. Çünkü zaman geçiyor da sizi şey yapmayayım.
Ya, rica ederim. Eğer telaş etmeyin. Şey
Ben
yapabilirseniz.
o şey faili bulamıyorum ekranımda da onun için
Yani Word belgesi olaraksa efendim tam ekranın ortasında. Alt,
nerede? Tepede?
alttan 1, 2, 3, 4. sırada. Alttan 4. sırada en ortada.
Ama bu presentation'ın şey değil. Yani
Metni değil mi?
o file değil o.
Anladım. Peki.
Siz
İsterseniz ekran paylaşımınızı kapatın. Profesör Elsner'e söz verelim. Siz o arada o dosyayı açın. Sonra sizinle devam edelim. Olur mu efendim?
evet işte ben diyorum siz şimdi Jürgen Elsner'e sözü
Tamam.
verin. Ben
Peki.
burada araştırayım bakayım
O
çünkü
zaman
karıştı burada biraz.
tamam. Ekran paylaşımını durdurun efendim.
Evet.
Siz kendi ekran paylaşımınızı lütfen durdurun.
Aha, tamam. Siz o zaman Profesör Elsner'e sözü verin.
Evet. Evet.
Tamam. Ben mikrofonumu kapatayım.
Yes.
Ses çıkmasın.
It's a technical accident, Professor Jürgen Elsner. Professor Agayeva will try to find her presentation file, and she permitted the first presentation is your. If you wish, we can go with your. Okay. Okay. Saygıdeğer konuklar, Profesör Agayeva bakımından bir sunum şeysi oldu. Aksaklığı inşallah o düzelecek. O takdirde bu ilk oturumda sunumunu yapmak üzere Almanya'dan katılan değerli Profesör Jürgen Elsner'e sözü vermek istiyorum. Now I give the floor to my esteemed colleague, Professor Jürgen Elsner, to make his presentation. Here you are, Professor. You're welcome. Good morning, John O'Connell.
Nasılsınız?
Teşekkürler. Hoş geldiniz. Professor Elsner, please open your microphone. It seems mute. Please open your microphone. We will be able to hear your sound better if you open your microphone. Your microphone seems closed, sir.
Now, yes, you can hear me.
Yes, yes,
It's
very well. And please, you can adjust your camera position also. Yes.
like this.
Yeah, great. You're welcome.
Well, I don't know what happened, but I saw that there are some problems.
I think Professor Agaeva couldn't open her presentation, sir. After you, she will try to open and going on. Yes.
Now
this is your turn.
Now I will speak on the universal potential of the Makam principle, right?
Yeah.
Well, I can read now.
Yes. Here you are.
Yes. Anniversaries of important personalities in cultural life of peoples involuntarily evoke the thoughts on the relationship between artistic excellence and its starting point or the corresponding tradition. In the case of our jubilarian Tanburi Cemil Bey, it is about music that is bound to the Makam principle. This principle stands as the most general expression for a special type of musical thinking, articulating and producing, which has found expression over large periods of time in a variety of different historical developmental traits and regional traditions from Central Asia to Northwest Africa. Nominally and factually, the term derives from the highly developed modern tradition of Makam music making that developed in the Near East since the late Middle Ages. Because of the tonal, melodic, and constructive characteristics it encompasses, it is suitable to include all other regional traditions that run under different names but belong to this type of production. Throughout history, different potentials or stages of development of the type of musical thinking and expression underlying the Makam principle have found expression in different classifications and determinations: Parda, Shad, Awaz, Tarkib, Shurba, Gushe, etc. But all changes, differentiations, and special developments have not cancelled the specific basis of melodically conceived musical production. The new classes of melodies, too, are still subject to designation, differentiation, identification according to tonal melodic characteristics, which not only include the tonal stock, tonal steps and intervals, but also to a decisive degree include melodic peculiarities. At the same time, these different potentials indicate that this principle is not a rule to be followed. Rather, it works in the manner of an open system that offers many possibilities for development and allows creative forces to make their own decisions. The results are to be accepted as historical facts and at most to be questioned according to their origin and development. The core of the Makam principle is formed by a limited tonal melodic feature complex. They represent tone groupings in the third to fifth range in a special abundance and intervallic arrangement and with a specific tonal melodic function. According to the early Arabic-dominated theory, they are called jins, as well as iqt and bahr, and refer to the concept of musical production with small-scale melodic units of meaning, which can be traced back to the ancient Arabic traditions. It was taken up by the theorists who worked with ancient Greek ideas. The decisive thing about these characters' tone groupings is that they are fixed tonally melodically. Their interval relationships are stable and unchanging. They are not composed thematically or motivically, in contrast to theme and motive, which rely on the change of their intervallic structure. The melodic structures, according to the Makam principle, are not transformable, but only transposable. The complex musical productions, according to the Makam principle that can be observed today, were preceded by a long historical development, the traces of which can still be found in certain recent traditions. Thus, in the classical traditions of the Near East and also of North Africa, very small-scale, simple, non-compound melodies have been preserved, which in a sense do not rely on the combinatory possibilities that have been developed over centuries. It seems no less important, however, to trace the history of the Makam principle back to its roots, which point to ancient tribal and folk traditions, some of which have survived to the present day. In terms of melodic substance and construction, the old traditional huda comes into the picture, which I encountered in Egypt in the 1960s as mawal or dor al-gamal, among others, or also the work songs for drawing water with shaduf or tambour, the ploughing with the michras, for threshing with the nurak, or also the responsorial songs of the carrying parties in the excavation sites of Upper Egypt. The songs of the women in the flag around the pilgrimage also belong here. Likewise, certain Bedouin songs in Iraq, as well as Bedouin rabab play in Syria and Mizmar play in Yemen, provide corresponding examples. They are all characterized by a small-scale melody, which sometimes only has a third range and rarely goes beyond the fifth. Because of the historical references, the Bedouin genre of ayay in Algeria also deserves special interest in this context. It is also structurally oriented towards fourths and fifths. Without going into a detailed analysis of the examples given, which is actually necessary, it is only important to note in the present context that such small tonal melodic units of meaning provide, as it were, the basic fund and starting point for diverse melodic and formal music production that is fundamentally based on montage techniques. It ranges from the linking of simple intervallically fixed melodic tendencies and turns of various smallest musical figures and their appropriate expansion through repetition, sequencing, register-related displacement, embellishment, etc., to very complex, complicated melodic constructions in formal combinations. On the basis of the montage of such tonal melodic units of meaning, Arab musicians, even in pre-Islamic times, had musical constructions at their disposal that reached the extension of an octave. This manifested itself, among other things, in the second, fourth, second tuning, do, re, sol, la, of the skin-covered mizar, the arrangement of which is still preserved today in corresponding instrumental tunings, qitra, oud arbi, and peculiarities of the performance practice in Algeria and Morocco. With the rise of Islam as a power-grabbing ideology, which brought half the continent under the control of Arab rulers in the blink of an eye, the musical culture of the emerging empire also developed new impulses. Provided with good starting chances of the musical culture of Yemen and Hadramaut, which is still praised today, as well as the famous cultural centers in the Hijaz, Syria, and Iraq, the musical culture of the Caliph Empire gained intercontinental validity with the absorption and evaluation of the music of the conquered or newly neighboring culturally advanced states of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, which had already radiated onto it earlier. As early as the 7th century, musicians replaced the old second tuned mizhar with the wood-tuned oud, which was tuned in fourths throughout. The fourth, whose interval structure was defined by fingerings, majra, and used to determine the modes, asba, was from then on the interval that formed the system. The new system, supplemented by two connected fourths and an added tone to form an octave, found its theoretical reflection in various forms in the treatises of the following centuries, and reached its climax in the systematic description of Safi ad-Din in the 13th century. He systematized the available groups of tones with the lower fourth in the central dominant position, followed by a fourth extended to a fifth with an additional tone. Apparently, the fourth-fifth construction of the cycles already heralded the development of a new change in the system, which gave the fifth a central position. The shift of the center of the system from the lower fourth to the fifth above it began during the lifetime of Safi ad-Din and the slightly younger Ashirazi, by explicitly recognizing the fourth degree of the system as the most important tone instead of the lowest degree. System permutations were historically significant events in the development of music in the Muslim world. They marked decisive new beginnings, upheavals, shifts, warps, and also separations in the musical cultures of the Near and Middle East and North Africa. For example, the shift of the most prominent node of the system to the fourth around 1300 as a result of the strong influence of Persian musical practice had quite far-reaching consequences. The fifth-fourth structure of the permuted system created problems of classification for the surviving melodic material with a fourth structure, which at the time shaped the melodies of many regional traditions and whose effectiveness was still long recorded as a norm by subsequent treatise writers. The dominant position of the fourth also applied to the traditions of Central Asia in particular, and has determined the melodic orientation of classical music practice until recent times, for which Abdulwali Abdurrashidov singled out the fourth is the most characteristic interval. But even in today's traditions of the Near East and North Africa, numerous melodies are characterized with fourth structure. The aforementioned systemic permutation in the late Middle Ages confronted the traditional tonal melodic structures with a mind-blowing new constellation. Not all of them fitted easily into the new fifth-fourth system. But musicians and theorists knew what to do in view of the new system. If their music could not be adapted to the new orientation, they solved the problem with a sensible alternative. They simply shifted the traditional melodies with a fourth-fourth second structure, not by a fourth from sol to do, the keynote of the permuted system, but by a fifth to re. The solution represents a compromise. On the one hand, it accepts that the fourth determined system on sol has been transformed into the fifth determined system on do, whereby the structurally second ranked octave sol of the old system moved into the position of the fifth and advanced structurally and tonally melodically to a central pillar tone of the new system. On the other hand, however, the old fourth structure adapted to the new situation only insofar as it was simply moved up a fifth without any inner change. This paid respect to the important pillar tone sol of the new system, with which the fourth of the old system, functioning as a second pillar tone, coincided without damaging its own structural characteristics or those of the new system, or without changing the register to an extreme degree. On the basis of the fifth-fourth system that emerged from the permutation of the late Middle Ages, the special musical production associated with the term maqam, which was disseminated by Shirazi, began. It characterizes the further development in the Near East and North Africa, which finds essential support in Ottoman Turkish music production. It is performed in the musical cultures of the ancient Oriental empires, as evidenced by the 7 royal melodics, Turuk al-Mulukiyya, of the ancient Persians, probably the ancient Persian system of the 7 Pardaha, or the melodic designation Khusravani. It is characterized by the increased designation and merging of personal, local, and regional traditions, and in particular, the merging of the same and different tone groups. An interesting reproduction of the system permutation of the late Middle Ages is shown by the already mentioned ayai genre of the Bedouins of Algeria. Apart from the fact that the classical music tradition of Algeria also shows all kinds of after effects of this, the four structured ayai types, Sruji, Ksuri, Sa'ihi, and Baburi, reflect the implementation of the historical process in two ways. To distinguish between them, the musicians have used the terms habet, descending, falling, low, and talia, rising, ascending, elevating, high. Habet denotes the basic form of the ayai type, which begins with the fundamental of the system fifths. But talia covers two different possibilities of realization. In the first case, the melodic nucleus of the given ayai type begins one tone above the new system root, in accordance with the late medieval transposition of four structured melodies. The whole tone between the fundamental of the system and the melodic fourth completes the latter to the system compatible fifths. In the second case, the melodic nucleus lifts with the fundamental of the system fifth and is filled up to the fifth by a tone added to the framework fourth above. It is obvious that the ayai tradition has absorbed impressions, information, suggestions, structural patterns in whatever way it has been conveyed along the historical path. The result is that the Bedouin musicians expanded and enriched the fourth-oriented music of their tribes, which had its root in pre-Islamic times, with great creative potency by referring to the fifth structure that had been favored regionally since the late Middle Ages. A particular creative achievement of the ayai musicians, however, is the processing of the structural problems stirred up by the late medieval systemic permutation, or rather their echo. On the one hand, they retain the fourth melodic models of the ayai in their basic state, habet versions. On the other hand, they, strong in tradition and cleverly, get to the bottom of the problems of systemic change with two different locally and used talia versions, through transposition or adaptation. In this way, they reproduce both fictitious identity-preserving fifth transposition of fourth-coined melodies in the new fifth system, as well as adopting such melodies with fifth expansion to the constellation of the fifth system. In this way, Bedouin musicians tapped into the late medieval resetting of the system in continuation of their ancestral venerable tradition without breaking with it. In the post-Safavid period, the compound maqamat and the branches, Murakkab, Tarkib, Shu'bah, became increasingly important. Interestingly, Al-Laziki, 16th century, who is very open to the development of musical thought and likes to point out differing opinions of the ancients and the moderns, states expresses verbis after the extended list of fourth-fifth combinations that the term maqam associated with these cycles, and especially the famous cycles, the al-Adwaq al-Mashhura, of the ancients, is reduced in content. Contemporaries understood it to mean group consonant incomplet, للجموع الملائمة غير الكاملة. He devotes a separate chapter to these incomplete groups and occasionally provides them with references to different understandings between the ancients and the moderns. Al-Laziki thus points to the special line of development that Ottoman Turkish maqam music making has basically taken in recent history, with the specification of the maqam core and various additions and insertions or combinations. The fixation of the tonal melodic cores in the Sayr, which finally transcends the narrow traditional maqam framework, and the growing role of the embellishment of the melodic cores, which Al-Laziki probably already has in mind when he depicted the maqamat of his time and formulated "Nous nous bornons à n'en définir que les formes fondamentales, car les ornements que l'on peut leur adjoindre présentent une variété illimitée et dépendent de la fantaisie du joueur." Mark in perspective important and significantly developed moments of creative maqam music making in the newer Ottoman Turkish tradition. They form the historical background on which Tanburi Cemil Bey new creative art is based. If the concept of the maqam principle is used to abstract from individual regional traditions, this does not mean the negation of the independence and intrinsic value of these traditions. In reality, it is precisely these concrete musical traditions and productions in which the principle manifests itself and alone attains real existence. But it creates a connection, and therein lies the meaning of abstraction, to other traditions of the same kind that are historically anchored and develop in different ways. It allows the determination and summary of the history of maqam music making as a musical principle of production, and enables a deeper understanding of this system of thought and articulation. From the analytically collected data, the determination of the form characteristics and the state of development of the system, into which the repertoires are integrated in detail, the nature, history, and change of this universal musical production type can be comprehensively deduced. Thank you very much. Ach, ich höre nicht.
Ruhi Bey, mikrofonumuz kapalı. Sizin mikrofonunuz kapalı Ruhi Bey.
Evet, tamam şimdi.
Şimdi oldu.
Thank you very much, Professor Jürgen Elsner. We would like to thank Professor Elsner for his valuable presentation. The title of his presentation was Makam on the Universal Potential of the Makam Principle. Makam prensibinin evrensel potansiyeli üzerine başlıklı değerli sunumu için Profesör Jürgen Elsner'e çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Thanks a lot, dear professor, for joining us and for your invaluable contribution. Thank you very much indeed. Now we had postponed her presentation. Professor Suraya Agayeva from Baku Scientific Academy. She will present on the future of the description of musical instruments in the treatise ul-Qulub. ul-Qulub eserinde sazların tasvir özellikleri üzerine başlıklı sunumu için şimdi sözü Azerbaycan Milli Bilimler Akademisi üyesi Profesör Doktor Suraya Agayeva'ya veriyorum. Bakü'den katılıyor. Söz sizin Sayın Agayeva. Buyurun efendim.
Teşekkür ederim Sayın Ruhi Bey. On the features of the description musical instruments in the treatise ul-Qulub. This report is prepared on the basis of the study of the rare written source, the manuscript ul-Qulub, Beauty of Arts, kept in the Institute of Manuscripts of the National Academy of Sciences of Azerbaijan in Baku. The title of this manuscript in the catalogue is given as ul-Ruh, Beauty of Spirit. The comparative analysis of versions of this treatise on music showed that the Baku manuscript of ul-Ruh also includes another work named ul-Qulub, its other name being Kut ul-Arwah, spiritual form. The copyist and writer of these manuscripts is Abdul Hussein Shirazi. This treatise on music was finished in 1233 in the Muslim city of Kashan during the time of the Qajar government. Shirazi wrote that it is in memory of his dear and noble brother Muhammad Sadiq Shirvani. The section addressed to students of the younger generation with the appeal, "Dear, you must know that," has a didactic character and is reminiscent of the famous Kabusname of Keykavus, 11th century, or Seydi's 15th century treatise on music al-Matla, and is not typical for the ul-Ruh. An important proof that the manuscript includes two different works is the presence of a section on musical instruments, which is absent in ul-Ruh. The treatise ul-Qulub describes 7 musical instruments: erganun, barbet, kanun, kamancha, ney, tar, and santur. Apart from the ney, the rest of the instruments are accompanied by drawings. It is known that attitude towards music in Islam was generally positive. This is confirmed by many facts. Among them is flourishing of musical performance and the science of music in the Muslim East in the Middle Ages. But in some threads of Islam, as for example in the Naqshbandi Sufi order, the playing on musical instruments was prohibited. That is why the author of the treatise persistently reminds readers of the guidelines of music and musical instruments, of need to respect musicians and teachers of musical art, and to remember them with gratitude after their death. Describing musical instruments, the author is concerned with their appearance, the way they are played, as well as aesthetic perception of instrumental music and its emotional impact on the listener. Tar, tambur. According to the author, musicians refer to the tambur as tar. And traditional Azerbaijani painting of artists. Among them is well-known painting Girl Playing the Tar by Azerbaijani artist Abu Qasim Tabrizi, which was created during the reign of the Turkic Qajar dynasty in 1816. Sesim duyuluyor mu? Sesim geliyor mu?
Geliyor.
Sesim geliyor.
Geliyor Sayın Agayeva. Zaman zaman çok küçük tutukluklar oluyor ama genel olarak geliyor.
The rare depiction of a musician or star in a treatise on music is important for the organology. The shape of that stringed instrument, reminiscent the number 8, is typical for the form of the body of the tar, the main instrument of classical music of Azerbaijan. In the picture you can see the illustration from the ul-Qulub. It is the player of tar. The instrument tar, known as a disease medicines, many diseases are treated with drugs and some by playing musical instruments, which is a form of self-medication. Its picture is given here in such a way that the owners of tar both benefit from it and remember us with blessing. Master of subject are always courteous, diet, exercise regularly, and tend to read scientific literature. This instrument was not invented for pleasure, but for therapeutic purposes. The conditions for this are as follows. In summer, when the sun is in Leo and Libra and is advisable to fix it. There are verses praising the sound of the tar, and the name of the performed makams are also mentioned. Kamancha. Those who play this instrument should be polite in the service of the master and respect the master so that they always succeed and work for everyone and do not disturb those listening. The other name is musigar, is made at request of the heart and is therefore used and many other diseases. Erganum. According to description of the erganum or organum, in the Eastern poetry of the Middle Ages, many modern researchers interpret it as string instrument. Its varieties were widespread in Azerbaijan at that time. The prominent scholar-musician of Azerbaijan, Abdulkadir Maragi, classified it as European wind keyboard instrument. This is information about Erganun from the manuscript Behçet ul-Qulub. It must be made of wood. If wood is not found, sandalwood is also good. It is the form of the long rectangle with 21 pins at the top and 27 pins at the bottom. Several rows of pins are located opposite each other. Pins are skinned, and it is better to use deer skin here. Then strings are laid over them and certain order. Erganun put on the podium and play on it. You can see illustration from the Behçet ul-Qulub. Barbat is oud-type string musical instrument that is played by plectrum. However, the manuscript describes an unusual percussion string instrument of the santur type, but on which sounding balls of the various sizes are additionally suspended. Play it with 4 sticks. In Behçet ul-Qulub is right. Barbat must be made of the best wood. This is the best instrument. The player should place a high chair under his feet during the performance. They make 4 hammers, one of gold, one of silver, one of ivory, and one of ebony, and hold it between their fingers. Kanun. As we can see on the picture, it is not kanun, which we know as the traditional instrument. In the picture, we can see the other shape and other construction. In Behçet ul-Ruh is writing that kanun, it is one of the number of amazing musical instruments. It is shown together with the musician. The listener's mind is regulated and his attention is improved. He who hears 1/4 of the voice of the kanun will reach the level of wisdom, and he will be able to do many things. Scientists say that music is very good science, and that the benefits of this strange science will increase the benefits of divine art, namely the art of science. At the beginning of the performance, attention should be paid to the characteristic of the audience so that they do not leave fret, and to cheer up those assembled by playing extensively. As we can see, it is a very different shape of instrument kanun. About santur, in the Behçet ul-Qulub we can see information. It is only one sentence, and they said that santur has 45 strings. Near of this picture, I demonstration the the picture of the Gajar Iran artist named Ahmed, a woman playing santur. Conclusion. The manuscript Behçet ul-Qulub, Beauty of Hearts, is the rare and important written source of the 17th, 18th centuries. Some information and illustrations of some popular in the East musical instruments, usual idea of them. But investigation of the history of musical instruments shows that over the centuries, various original musical instruments, differing from each other in external attributes and design, but the same, similar in name, have been created. For example, we know these instruments such as Nusha, Mugni, Erganun, Ruhabzai, Chagana, and other medieval musical instruments also had same name but different shape and functions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, dear Professor, for your invaluable presentation. This information was so big and useful for all of us. Bakü Bilimler Akademisi üyesi Profesör Doktor Suraya Agayeva'ya Behçet ul-Qulub eserinde sazların tasvir özellikleri üzerine başlıklı değerli sunumu için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. We would like to thank the Professor Suraya Agayeva for her presentation. The title was On the Future of the Description of Musical Instruments in the Treatise Behçet ul-Qulub. Thank you very much indeed, Professor. Now, dear guests and şimdi sunumunu yapmak üzere sözü saygıdeğer meslektaşım Cardiff Üniversitesi öğretim üyesi Profesör Doktor John O'Connell'a vermek istiyorum. John O'Connell'ın sunumunun başlığı Üstâd-ı Cihân, Mısır müziğinde Cemil Bey'in kalıcı mirası. Now I would like to give the floor to my esteemed colleague and old friend Professor John O'Connell from Cardiff University. His presentation title is Üstâd-ı Cihân, The Enduring Legacy of Cemil Bey in Egyptian Music. Here you are, Professor.
Teşekkürler Ruhi Bey. Yorgun Bey, Suraya Hanım, çok teşekkürler. As a student, I studied for 11 years Arab music with the renowned musician Ali Jihad Rasi. I say Arab music, but in fact what I really mean is the musical repertoire of the Takht ensemble in Egypt. Rasi defines this music with reference to colors, alwan. In particular, he cites Laun Tarab in his famous book of musical aesthetics in Cairo. What struck me most about this music was the Turkish character of the repertoire. We performed different peshrevler, bashara in Arabic, and samayler, samayat, which had been composed by the luminaries of the Ottoman tradition, such as Osman Bey and Yusuf Pasha, to name a few. Yes, we did perform Arab and Egyptian genres such as dulab, darij, created by Egyptian composers such as Ibrahim Al-Arian, but these were in the minority, often operating as an introductory item to a suite of vocal and instrumental pieces arranged in a specific maqam, called wasla in Arabic. It's the same principle as fasl in Turkish. Here's a picture of Jihad, that is the ensemble. Of course, the instrumental composition of Tanburi Cemil Bey featured prominently in our musical ensemble. The Samai in the Maqam Farfaza or Samayat, Maqam Shadaraban, these were favorites, as were the Longa in Maqam Nahawand and the Sirto in Maqam Nakriz. However, my favorite was the Samai in Muhayir, in the Maqam Muhayir. I loved the majesty of the melodic line, the classical architecture of the musical phrasing, and the elegant parallelism of the musical sequences, and the joy of returning to the regal refrain Teslim after that modulation in the fourth Hani, the metric modulation in the fourth Hani. This was truly magical and still is. However, I did not realize then how distinctive the Arab version of this piece was. The metric cycle as Samai Taqil, which means heavy Samai, was different from the Turkish original, Aksak Samai. The tuning was idiosyncratic since it employed quarter tones, equal-tempered quarter tones, in contrast to the Turkish system of tuning. Added to this, musical transposition and instrumental tuning made my relearning of this Turkish masterpiece somewhat traumatic. Here's an example of Samai. Okay, this is by Atura, meaning heritage ensemble. As is traditional in the Taht ensemble repertoire, each Hane and each Teslim is repeated twice. Why would compositions by Cemil Bey in particular and Turkish composers in general occupy a central position in the repertory of the Taht ensemble? Indeed, El-Hitami itemizes 64 such works in his authoritative compilation of classical instrumental pieces in Egypt. Turkish compositions there representing about 60% of the total. Noteworthy here is the elevated standing according to the instrumental works of Cemil Bey, 6 are itemized in total. Although some authorities like Yilmaz Öztuna have been especially disparaging about this Arabization of Turkish music, the perpetuation of an Ottomanist register in Egyptian music is truly remarkable. This is especially so since the Vilayet of Egypt became disentangled from the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 18th century with the French occupation. After that, under the autocratic rule or governorship of Mehmet Ali Pasha, Turkish became the principal language in military, in the bureaucracy, and of course it was the language at court. So much so to the surprise of Turkish visitors like Zekai Dede, apparently according to Rafi Ektabey, who resided in Cairo for about 10 years during the mid-19th century. It is said that he studied with a Shihab el-Din, who was a famous musicologist and music specialist, who actually brought the muashahat from Syria to Egypt. This is Abdulham Uli, who was a very famous singer, the Münir Nurettin Selçuk of Egypt. Turkish music played a critical role in this Ottomanization of Khedive Egypt. Turkish instrumental ensembles were sponsored on ceremonial occasions. The Mehter was revived in 1865, and the chamber ensemble İncisaz Takımı was widely used. Most of all, different Khedive rulers invited Turkish musicians from Istanbul to Cairo. These include the famous Nezen Ismail Deli Efendi, who became Sheikh of the Mevledi Teki in Cairo, who was sponsored by Abbas Hilmi I. They also included the composers Aziz Medeni or Medineli Effendi and Nevz Rez Pasha, who were patronized by his successor, the first Khedive, Ismail Pasha. As Rassi shows, Ismail Pasha also supported Egyptian artists. The most famous of these, as you can see on the plate, is Abdul al-Hamuli, an Arab vocalist who accompanied the Khedive on his trips abroad and is reputed to have studied Turkish music while resident in Istanbul. I'll quote it one anecdote. On one occasion in 1904, al-Hamuli performed for Sultan Abdulaziz Hamid II, where he was apparently instructed to teach the court musicians Arab music. I'm not sure that would have gone down very well. Musali coined the expression "école khediviale" to represent the intercultural exchange through music between Istanbul and Cairo. Of significance, al-Hamuli introduced what Marcus calls the academic maqamat of Nahawand, Hijazkar, Ajam, I think it was probably Ajam Ashuran actually, into the Egyptian repertoire. Al-Hamuli translated Turkish texts into Arabic and set them to music using Arabic modes. Rassi suggests that the Egyptian vocalists adapted these Turkish modes in a way that suited the Turkish musical taste. Of this, I'm sure, Öztürk was famously disapproving. As part of this Ottoman transformation, al-Hamuli learned Turkish and married a Turkish Egyptian. Notably, as you can see from the picture here, he acquired a contemporary Turkish visage by sporting a moustache rather than a beard, and emulated a modern Turkish appearance by wearing a suit and a tarbush. In sight and in sound, al-Hamuli had become the Egyptian equivalent of a Turkish stereotype, the reformed gentleman, Tanzimat adamı. The artist becoming transformed from a village conservative to an urban sophisticated in one generation. The Ottomanization of Egyptian culture was not confined to Egyptian music. In literature and art, especially calligraphy, Ottoman excellence was widely emulated. Even the contemporary drive in Ottoman territories towards modernization and westernization was wholly embraced, be it in the guise of engineering works such as the Suez Canal, or in the construction of large buildings such as the Cairo Opera House. This ambivalent suspension between East and West is neatly encapsulated by Musali. According to him, the Khedival rulers had to imitate the West for prestige and to mimic the East, and in this instance, in Istanbul, for approval. Why? Bearing in mind that Mehmet Ali Pasha, a mere soldier, probably, he was a janissary, probably of Albanian origin, had seized power in a very bloody coup d'etat, Istanbul and not Cairo provided a cultural model for validating his rule and his dynasty. When Britain occupied Egypt in 1882, Istanbul also acted as a political and cultural counterpoint to oppose Western colonial ambitions. In this context, the Khedival patronage of Turkish musicians continued well into the 20th century. Here, a very famous picture. I'm afraid I took this off the internet. I have a copy of the original, but the quality isn't very good. You see Refik Fersan in the middle, Tanburi Cemil Bey, with whom he studied, and Musa Suraya Bey on the right-hand side. This is where the renowned tambur solo virtuoso Refik Şemseddin Bey comes into the picture. A pupil, and probably the last, of Tanburi Cemil Bey, and I'll call him Refik Fersan from now on, at the behest of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, had already played for the deposed Khedive Abbas Hilmi II, who at the time was resident as an exile in Turkey. As an aristocrat with court connections, Refik Fersan benefited from the patronage of a distant relative, the philanthropist Prince Yusuf Kemal. He was the great-grandson of Mehmet Ali Pasha. Yusuf Kemal had succumbed to his family's penchant for promoting Turkish culture and for patronizing Turkish musicians. Refik Fersan in 1928 performed for the prince on his yacht when he visited Istanbul. Yusuf Kemal was so impressed by the performance that he paid the artists a monthly allowance of £20. Also awarded with a similar stipend was his friend and colleague, the renowned Turkish vocalist Münir Nurettin Selçuk. Apparently, the financial support was terminated as a result of malicious interference by Egyptian bureaucrats, and that's Murat Bardakçıl found that out. The following year, Yusuf Kemal invited the two artists for 2 months to reside at his palace in Cairo. Refik Fersan's wife, Bahire Hanım, also accompanied, and you see them there on the left-hand side under the Arabic. Apart from visiting tourist sites, the artist recording a number of lightweight ditties, what Refik Fersan calls mascara items, mascara la lutlar, for his master's voice. Some of these are still very popular today. The three artists gave 2 concerts in the Azbakiye Garden Theatre, the first on Friday the 25th, 1929, and the second on Monday the 28th, 1939. Like similar events in Turkey, the concerts were promoted and sponsored by his master's voice. Each performance consisted of 4 sections. 3 short fasıllar featuring classical words such as besteler, semayeler, and semi-classical words such as şarkılar, and here we see Leyla as a fantasy şarkı. Unusual at the time was the inclusion together of a vocal and instrumental taksim, which by then had become quite outdated in Turkish classical music. It is interesting to note that no item in Arabic was included in either performance. After all, Refik Fersan had recently composed and recorded a number of macaronic numbers in French and Arabic, such as the Şarkı in Makam Rast, entitled Your Beauty, Madam, is for Love. Pour l'amour Cemalek, Madame. Yes, canonic works by Ismail Dede and Zekai Dede are featured in the program in the context of traditional suites. These compositions would have been familiar to the elite audience of Turkish Egyptians. So too were the instrumental classics by Tanburi Cemil Bey. And you can see just down here, if I can get my cursor, you see Cemil Bey, and see how they spell it, Gamil Bey, because the Jim in Egyptian Arabic is pronounced as a G. And another interesting aspect of the program is Birinci Konserin programı. So they're still writing in Ottoman, but the actual, this is Fasıl al-Awwal, so that's the first Fasıl, and then it's Arba, so that's in Arabic. And so you have sort of this polyglot mixture of different languages being represented on these programs. There was no attempt, however, Cemil Bey is represented, Taht Yusuf Efendi is represented. However, there's no attempt to include traditional compositions associated with what Rassi calls the central domain of the Tarab tradition, such as those by the Armenian Asbak Ağa or the Turkish educator Ismail Hakkı Bey. Such compositions and composers were probably considered by the elite trio to be lowbrow. No, the 2 concerts in the Azbakiye Gardens were an enduring reminder of the cultural hegemony of Turkish music in Egypt. It must be wondered, who was the intended audience for such a revisionist expression of Turkish classicism? After all, Turkish classical music, as Alaturka, was a focus of critical scrutiny during the early Republican period. The program features information in Arabic and Turkish. Ottoman Turkish was still in use, as it was in Cyprus and other British dependencies, presumably intended to attract a local audience. The program also presents information in English and French, perhaps to attract a foreign clientele, although I suspect contemporary educated Egyptians would have been conversant with all 4 languages. Perhaps most surprising of all, the programs do not mention ticket prices. This is very unusual for his master's voice. That is very unusual for his master's voice, since the theatre had to be hired and the publicity had to be paid. Given that the record company had featured Egyptian artists in its Turkish catalogue, in 1928, ul-Qulub has 5 items listed in the Sahib-i Nizzesi catalogue of that year. I suggest that his master's voice was also aiming to promote Turkish artists in Egypt. Other companies were already doing this, including the local branch of Polyfonwerke, which featured Turkish ensemble Uturumu Müzik Cemiyeti in its 1927 catalogue. We often think of Nurettin Selçuk with reference to the great traditors of the Turkish tradition. We think of his connection with Zekai Dede by way of Ahmet Ersoy, and by extension to the great Dede Efendi. However, the place 5 here hints at a different path of musical transmission. This was taken actually in Cairo, this photograph, this famous iconic representation of Nube. And he started performing tambur regularly in his concert series, generally as an interval in the middle of concerts. Nurettin Selçuk studied tambur with Refik Fersan. This points to a different chain of musical authority, Mesh Silsilesi. By way of Refik Fersan, Nurettin Selçuk could trace his musical lineage back to the great Tanburi Cemil Bey. Indeed, the significance of Refik Versan is often overlooked in this matter. In his archive, that is of Münir Nurettin Selçuk, the didactic imprint of Refik Versan upon the musical development of Münir Nurettin Selçuk is very apparent. From the haphazard transcriptions in Hamparsu Notası as individual items, to the organized collections of song texts, ifte mecmuaları, often in scrapbooks, Refik Versan's neat handwriting, and it's much clearer than Münir Bey's handwriting, appears on many of the relevant documents, and quite a few of his compositions are actually archived there too, of Refik Bey. Probably upon the recommendation of Refik Versan, Münir Nurettin Selçuk collected together a number of artistic recordings by Tanburi Cemil Bey. Apparently never played, they're in pristine condition. And this is a picture of Fahire, Refik Versan's wife, in 1992. When interviewed in 1992, Fahire Versan made this connection explicit. When speaking about Münir Nurettin Selçuk, she stated somewhat caustically, Refik'ten öğrendi hepsini. He learned everything from Refik. That is, Münir Nurettin Selçuk could rightly claim the musical authority of Tanburi Cemil Bey through his intimate and extended association with Refik Versan. Thank you.
Değerli Profesör John O'Connell'a yakın tarihi yansıtan, performans pratiklerini yansıtan bu çok değerli sunum için teşekkür ediyoruz. Thanks a lot for your invaluable presentation, which mirrored so near past of music history and performance practices area. My dear friend, thank you very much indeed. Now we have completed the first session with invaluable contributions of these three eminent professors of the University of Makam. If our guests has any question or some additional information about the presentations, we can transfer the questions or informations to any of them. I think we should wait just for a while if any question we have or not, our dear professors. I will check my yes, our session assistants inform me that there is no any question yet, my dear professor. Okay. Actually, may I ask just one thing to Professor John O'Connell? It is very new information, for instance, for me. At the second part of concert program of Tanburi Refik Bey's in Cairo, we read Peşrev Cemil Bey in Rust.
Yes.
But as we know, we didn't see and we didn't know Cemil Bey has a Rast Peşrev. This is very new information for me. Are we sure that that Peşrev belongs to Tanburi Cemil Bey?
Well, if Refik Versan was actually performing it, it must have been. I have heard a recording of a Peşrev in Makam Ras by Cemil Bey, because I actually asked the same question you were asking, and I found an old recording with a Peşrev by Cemil Bey.
Yes, if it is right like that, and if we can find the notations or score of that Peşrev, it will be a good finding for the area. Thanks a lot for your presentation and your sharing with us. Thank you very much indeed for this first session of International Tanburi Cemil Bey Symposium. Professor Jürgen Elsner from Germany, Professor Suraya Agayeva from Baku, Azerbaijan, and Professor John O'Connell from University of Cardiff. And Professor Elsner will say something, I think. Here you are, Professor. Please open your microphone. Mute off.
Now,
yes.
now it functions.
Yes. Here you are. We're listening to you.
Was war Ihre Frage? What was your question?
There was no any question. I only wanted to thank for your presentations and to end this session. If you have any additional words, we will listen them with big pleasure. Do you want to make any more contribution?
Ad hoc, I don't think so. In general, it is very interesting to assist such a symposium, and I know Suraya for a long time, and I saw the first time my colleague Cornel, and I was very interested in his experience of Egypt, because when I have been in Egypt and I wrote something on the maqam in Egypt, it was my second thesis, but in general I was interested in the folk music, and at the same time I was interested in studying the maqam, but not in a historical way, but in a musical direction, exactly. And always you cannot have enough information. The world of music is very big, and you can study and study, and there's no end. But this is the most interesting of our profession, that you have no end in your interests.
Yes. Actually, maybe some words will add Professor John O'Connell or some reply, Professor Jürgen Elsner.
I've known Jürgen for nearly 20 years now, Jürgen, and I've always liked your work, and I found it very inspiring, as I have yours, Suraya Hanım. But I'm very, very interested in that intersection, and Tanburi Cemil Bey is very interesting, that intersection between the folk and the classical, and that intersection also, things like waltz. There are accounts of waltzes within some of his taksimler. So that intersection between the folk and the classical that you've just been talking about is extremely important, I think, for understanding the developments of Suraya and some of the other terkibs and the like in the Ottoman tradition, and of course in the music of the Persianate world. It was a great honor to be on the same panel with you and Suraya Hanım.
Yes. Süreyya Hanım, son bir söz söyleyecek misiniz katılımcılara ve meslektaşlarınıza?
It was very pleasure for me to see my colleague, and of course it is very interesting reports, and I can know many interesting points and other sides of these creations. And unfortunately, the sounds of my computer has some problems, and that's why I could not listen all details of these reports, but I am sure that it was very important presentations, and I thank you for this participation, and good luck to all of you. Thank you very much.
We all thank for your invaluable contributions. Thank you very much indeed again, both eminent professors of Makam Universe. This was actually historical moment in the music history. I believe in these times, this duration will be recorded with golden letters in the page of music history. Thank you very much indeed, your join and the contributions. Thank you very much. Teşekkürler John O'Connell. Teşekkürler Suraya Agayeva. Teşekkürler Professor Jürgen Elsner. So I want to end this session, the first session, opening session. I think just for a while we will be together again in another session. Bir ikinci oturumda buluşacağımız zamana kadar açılış oturumunu kapatıyorum. Değerli katılımcılara ve akademisyenlere saygılar sunuyorum. Have a good day.
Thank you, Professor Ruhi Ayangil. Thank you very much for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jürgen,